So for these lives, you won't need any kind of art supplies to be with you. It'll be more of like a time-lapsed video, but it's something that you'll be able to start, or if you wanted to follow along after, you could. There'll be a reference image in the end. So throughout this broadcast that we're going to be doing, we'll be going over kind of like how you could start a project, the ways that'll be more fluid for you, and hopefully it'll be able to help pique your interest in the arts. So we're going to start out by drawing a simple shape. When we start out with a drawing, it's always good to start out with a sketch. At least that's typically what I do. When you start out with a sketch, it gives you something to work with that you can use for adjustment. A sketch doesn't necessarily need to be super refined or super on point. It's meant to be messy. It's meant to have some mistakes. And it gives you like a really nice rough draft of the kind of stuff that will eventually be altered or maybe finalized. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to be drawing basically the muzzle. I'm just trying to keep the proportions pretty to scale. I do have a reference picture on the side for this. And one of the reasons I chose the lion to draw was I think it has a lot of really cool symbolism behind it. In the movie Narnia, they represent Jesus Christ as a lion. I think it's really cool. Lions are always represented as kings or rulers. And I think that's just a beautiful representation of how to see Jesus Christ. We're going to go through and we're going to be drawing these little features of the face, such as the eyes. It's good to try and keep them proportionate to each other on the right and the left side. And as the live goes on, feel free to ask any questions that you may have about drawing, because I'll be trying to answer them as much as I can throughout this live to the best of my ability. So we're going to be drawing just the basic shapes. We're not going to be filling in. We don't want to make things too dark. As you see this drawing that I'm doing, the pencil is pretty dark, but that's mainly just so we can show up dark enough for you guys to see. I actually haven't drawn an animal in a year since this project, so it was a really fun one to try and throw in there. Lions are really fun. Like the big cats are always really nice. I know I have some family that are really into tigers, so I think it's something that they'll enjoy. I'm going in and adding some of those nice creases around the eyes, letting it show that depth. They're kind of like sunken in behind the muzzle. And I'm trying to add those little strands of hair that are connecting to the actual face. For lions, the hair around the face isn't as long as the ones on the face. So I tried to make the face itself a lot smoother, showing that there's a lot smaller hair. And as I was kind of going through with this, I was playing around with it, especially with like the mane. I was never really too experienced with drawing hair. And so it's kind of like my own mixed style. I go through and start adding clumps, little bits and pieces that are able to show me where the rest of the hair might fall. So I go and add those bigger, broader spaces. And then after is when you go in and finalize them with some individual lines to show the different hairs. I think it turns out really nicely. I'm trying to keep it as round as possible to make it look like a nice symmetrical line. But you also want to keep it organic. And you can do that by not being too meticulous with your work. Like I said, the sketch is especially supposed to be messy. If you spend too much time on the sketch, it's basically just doing the drawing in the first place. So like the sketch, if you do the sketch quickly and roughly, it allows for your drawing to get done quicker. And it's not saying that the quality will be lowered. It just helps the working process move faster. I'm just going around and adding these little details all around it, like fur, little lines. And then you're going to start going in with your pen. And when you do this, you want to choose a thinner pen to start out with. Because when you're going through with pen, you can't erase it. So you don't want to go too thick because you can't undo that kind of work. And this is when you want to start being pretty clean with it. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to rush it too much. And then on the line, I'm doing some, like if the lines aren't all attached, they're kind of separated. and it gives it that nice fur effect. It doesn't need to be too long. It just gives it like a nice little illusion.
Yeah, and so our first question is from Elder Christensen, Elder Spencer Christensen. He asks, "How do you draw so good?"
That's a great question. No one starts out drawing good. It's something that comes with a lot of practice. If you don't put time towards it like any other skill, it's not going to develop. Just like playing an instrument, you have to learn those songs before you can start making your own. Looking at other stuff that people have already created. A lot of times people think that art is cheating if you're looking at someone else's image, or you're not doing it right if you don't do it from your head, which is not true. It's like if you tried to play an instrument like a guitar and someone just handed it to you and said, okay, go play the guitar. But you won't be a real musician unless you only use your own music. You can't copy anyone else's. And you're not going to learn how to follow music or read music either. It makes it a lot more difficult. So the more you practice, the better you'll get. It kind of becomes memorization for your hands. As I'm going through with the hair, I'm kind of adding some nice lines, and I'm trying to keep them parallel to each other. It keeps it nice and clean. If you cross over another line, then it kind of messes them up. It looks more messy. So you want to keep them nice and parallel, nice and clean, so they're not overlapping. I'm just trying to go through with those clumps each individually. This is definitely a messier process because I am not used to drawing hair, and I was just going at it. I was just going wild. It's definitely good to take your time with those little details. You don't need to rush yourself. Art isn't something that's supposed to go fast. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to enjoy it. It doesn't need to be rushed. If you rush it more, then you're not going to enjoy it as much. And more than less, your project's not going to turn out the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, and our next question is from Sienna Sanders. She asks, "What does the gospel mean to both of you?"
For me, the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's a gift that's God's given us. It's a blessing that we're able to have on this earth. Just the knowledge behind it is something that I'm so grateful for. It has so much power that is able to seal us together as families.
Yeah, and for me, it's just directions on how to live a happy life, how to find joy and peace, and it's something to hope for, to hold on to through all the hard times that we all face in this life. It's just like an anchor for my soul that helps me find that joy in my life that it offers.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sienna.
And Spencer Christensen also asked, "What is your favorite thing to draw?"
That's kind of difficult. I like to draw a lot of different things. I think dragons were the ones that I grew up doing the most. Those are really fun. Or stick figures. A lot of times when you hear people talk about stick figures, like it's very simple. But it's one of my favorite things to draw. It gets like it's not as, I guess, doesn't have as many requirements when doing it. You can use your imagination as much as you like.
Awesome. And Benjamin Jones asked, "How long have you been drawing?"
I've been raised in an artistic family. It goes back a couple of generations. So art's kind of in my blood. I don't think I really took it too seriously or grabbed onto it too much until high school, when I'd pretty much draw every day during class. And that's when I really took a hold of it and wanted to continue it a lot more. But my family had raised me with art, so I've been doing it ever since I was a little kid. After you finish your line work in this, you're going to go through and erase all those pencil marks. That's why you want to try and keep your pencil marks light, so that way you're able to go through after and erase them. It helps keep it a lot cleaner. Otherwise, it'll have kind of like a stain behind it. I'm going through and just adding a couple more details while the pencil work is gone, to kind of see what it needs, add a little bit of lines to kind of show the furriness of it, and cleaning up any things that might not be attached.
And we have another question from Tisha Sanders. She asked, "Who's your favorite scripture hero?"
My favorite scripture hero, besides Jesus Christ, he saved us all. I'd probably have to say Alma the Younger in the Book of Mormon. He is like one of the greatest examples I've seen for like change and faith. He went through so much and he rose from it. It was something that he like, it gives you that promise knowing that you can never fall farther than the light of God can reach. I think that's so beautiful. As we jump into coloring the lion, you want to start out with a really light color. especially if you're using markers. So markers like this, I use a certain brand called Copic, and you have to do it layer by layer in a sense. So you're kind of stacking it on top of each other. So you start with a light layer, because if you go immediately in with a dark layer, it's not going to show up. So you have to kind of be careful how you handle it. So I'm just applying different shades and different colors, but always start with the brightest shade.
Yeah, so I actually have a question. What sets these markers apart from just using normal paints?
So these markers are alcohol based. So this ink is able to blend together a lot better. So the colors are able to be a lot more appealing to the eye. You're able to get them to, I guess, saturate each other. You can stack them. They aren't working necessarily by themselves. They work together, and that's what I love about them.
Yeah, and Skims Scott asked, "What kind of pen are you using?" And your favorite. And your favorite.
So for pens, for the line work, I've never really been too big on the name brand kind of pens. I've never really had like a good brand that I've found, but I've been using black liners. They're really nice and they don't bleed with the ink, because a lot of times when you use pens and go over like ink for the background, it'll smear it. You'll get it wet and it'll smear. But this one's really nice and it doesn't do that. So it's really convenient. And my favorite one, they all have different widths at the end. And I think my favorite is 0.4, 0.4. That one's super nice. It's not too thick and not too thin. You can like go parallel to it and make it thicker. Like it's just a perfect width. And as you see on this drawing, you want to start adding some shadow in it too. I added shadow on the left side. So when you're drawing, it's good to know where your lighting's coming from beforehand before you start getting too far. And in this line, the light's coming from the left, or the right, sorry. And I didn't add too harsh of a shadow on the left side, but you can already see it starting to pop. So it's not as flat as it was before. Just adding those darker, different colors in the mouth and on the nose. And I kind of did the face first to show kind of the process that we'll be doing. So we'll be doing the exact same thing for the mane. So I'm going through and I'm adding the lightest color that I have through all the mane, adding it in the ears, adding it in everything. And that's where I'm just going to start with that.
And I just wanted to ask too, like, what advice would you have for somebody who's just starting out with art, who wants to learn how to draw?
That's a great question. I think for a lot of the time, artists can be pretty intimidated by what they see out in the world. There's a lot of really good artists out there. And a lot of times, or pretty much all the time, they only show the work that is successful, the work that they like, or the work that those around them like. So it's hard to see the actual real world examples of them practicing, them learning, the mess ups that they had. When you're drawing, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. It's not all going to turn out well. So it's just good to stay motivated on what you can do and not try and, I guess, do what you can't. But yeah, as we're going through, we're just adding that darker shade, just filling it all in, getting all those little white pieces. This is like the second coat. So in this drawing, it kind of looks like I'm just wasting ink, right? It's just going down the first layer and you're covering it up with a completely darker colors where you can't even see it anymore. But that's kind of how these markers work. You don't need to separate them into their own segments. You stack them on top of each other and they make a different saturation. They make a different hue, a different color. And that's why these markers are so nice. So I'm going and adding some of that gold in each individual clump of hair. It's nice, making it nice and shiny, nice and clean.
And Sienna Sanders asked, how can you relate the patience you need to do art to the patience you need to have with God's plan for you?
That's a great question. That's a really good example that you've already given. The patience that you need in God's plan comes from like knowing that even though we might not always understand what God does for us, it's in his timing. He knows even if we might not. So it's trusting him and being patient in our trials, the thing that he's put in our path. And with art, it takes a long time. You're not going to be good at it at first. You need to learn more about it. You need to apply yourself to it and accept that you're not going to be perfect right off the bat. And it just comes with growth. Slowly but surely, little by little, is when you apply yourself and you learn more. That's how we grow. It doesn't need to be anything major. It doesn't need to be anything extravagant. It just needs to be something nice and small. we're going through and we're adding some more of those dark shades. You're just completely covering up the other color on the left side. That's where all the shadow is going to be. Right now, it just looks, it's a very yellow drawing. We're going to add more of the colors in a bit. But just getting it nice and blended together is something that really makes it pop and is really appealing to the eye. When you're drawing, you learn a lot of little tips and tricks, even if you learn them yourself. That's how it's been a lot for me. Like when you're drawing something and you make mistakes, even if they're small ones, you always notice the mistakes every single time. But those around you, they don't see those mistakes, the small mistakes. Like they're really hard to notice. But us as the artist, we notice them every single time. That makes it really difficult. And sometimes that's really intimidating to people. Like they often don't know that. They think everyone notices every little mistake that they've made in their piece of art, and it's not that way.
Yeah, and we have a great question from Kim Scott, or from Nikhil Sanders, said, what motivates you? Whether it's sharing your art or the gospel, what keeps you moving?
I guess just knowing that it'll make someone else happy. Like when you're an artist, you draw a picture that looks nice. It's not always just for you. It's for those around you. It's supposed to make people happy. That's the end goal for my art. Just showing it to people. Hopefully they have a good reaction to it. And it's the same with the gospel. When you know that it's going to be able to bless someone else's life, that's what keeps you moving, especially when you have the testimony that's blessed your own. As art has had its impact in my life from my family, from parents, from siblings, from everyone around me, it's just something that I've had that knowledge and I'm grateful for it. And just knowing that others around me not know about it is something that keeps me going. It pushes me on. Yep. And now we're going in with a lot more of a much darker shadow. It's a bit more aggressive of a color. And then you go in with one slightly lighter than that. It's still pretty dark. Just a little bit lighter. And you're going to go and start blending that in. I'm putting that on the left side of the lion's face and in those little parts where there may be shadow on his right, because it's not completely lit up on the right. And then you're going to go and add some blue. This might sound kind of weird. Some people, if you're coloring something, say you're coloring a sunflower, it's mostly yellow. And if you were trying to make a darker part of that sunflower, you'd, in your head, think, oh, I just need to use a darker yellow. But sometimes other colors can really make the difference. Like I found blue is really good for shadows. So I'm just adding that on the line, and it really makes it pop. It gives a different color that isn't just all yellow or all orange. It makes it look a lot more interesting as someone looks at it. And I went in with a really, really light blue at the end of that, over the white of the muzzle. That just gives it a little bit more of a differentiation from the color of the background. And then I went in along the left side with a much darker blue along the very edge. And it kind of changes the look and the depth of what you're looking at. So it doesn't look flat. It makes it look more like it's popping out. And I'm just going through and trying to blend all those little details. Going in with the pen and getting some of those final little touches. Getting some of those whiskers. It was really fun to do this project. I don't often draw animals, and it had been a while since I had. So it was a really good learning experience, and hopefully I'll be able to continue to draw them in the future. You learn a lot from it. And I was going in with the eyes, and I'm just adding some. I tried to find the most saturated golds I could find in my collection, just to make it pop out that much more. And I'm making the pupils of the eyes black, as dark as they can be. And I'm going to outline the almost finished product with a much darker pen. This just makes it stand out from the page so much more. It cleans up all those little messes you may have made on the outside if it went out of the line slightly, or if something just didn't look quite right. You go in there and it gives it like a nice kind of sticker look. I love that. I go in and add some of those final white highlights, those things that really make it stand out, clean up some of those things that maybe are a little messier. Showing it, and the shine on the nose and the eyes, that's what really makes it stand out. Those things that, it kind of changes the texture. You see it differently. And then you finally go in with some of the final little details with the pen. I went really thin with this one. I think it was 0.1 or a 0.2. So it's really thin. I just kind of went ham. And there it is, the lion. I was super proud of this one. It took a while, and it was really fun.
Yeah, and Spencer Christensen asked too, are you going to be doing this every week?
I think it would be fun to try and do every week. It just depends on when I can get this recorded and edited, because it does take some time to draw, and having that time as a missionary is not always easy to find. But I think it would be really fun. Hopefully I'll be able to share this with people around me. It's something that even if you don't like to draw, it's something that you'll be able to find a nice, cool picture that can stand out. These animals that God gave us, I think it's really fun to admire them, just drawing the things that God's already given us. So if I could do it every week, I definitely will. But I do plan to make this like a series.